In this video, I'm going to be casually covering the light upgrades I did to my old Compaq CQ5112F desktop computer that's been sitting in my closet for a while. This budget Windows Vista era computer notably came equipped with a 2006 dual-core Athlon X2 processor. These upgrades were done out of curiosity and to gain some cheap computer hardware experience than any other reason. First and foremost, this project started out with my desire to try my hand at re-thermal pasting a CPU. I'm not a fan of the screws used in this computer, especially the one that secured the side case panel. So I replaced it with a thumb screw I happen to have lying around. Of course, for convenience sake, replacing that bothersome screw was the first thing I did. Next, I worked on removing that large sticker on the case. All that I had in the house to remove the gunk that the sticker left behind was mineral oil. It was a slow process that involved some scrubbing with a soft towel, but eventually I got rid of it. If you are curious and wish to look up the specifications of my motherboard, or compare it to the one in your own old desktop, well, it is a MCN 68-LA revision 5.0 board. Way back in its day, I used this 300-watt power supply a lot, and all I can say is that it hasn't caught fire or fried my motherboard yet. With that being said, I'd be a bit sad if it did now. I should add that I didn't expect the use of a power supply retaining clip when I was trying to remove the power supply from the case. Disassembling the computer was pretty straightforward, though I did take a lot of pictures, so I'd know where to plug everything back in again. Other than the power supply retaining clip, my only surprise was dealing with some of the cables, which were difficult to unplug with my arthritic fingers. The CPU heatsink separated from the CPU easier than expected. I was actually anticipating some tricky surprise that would make it nearly impossible to remove. I was thankfully relieved when the heatsink easily detached from the CPU with no horrifying consequences. Wiping off the dry thermal paste from the heatsink and the CPU with a paper towel was a simple process. Later, cleaning both items with alcohol and a few Q-tips ended up being easy enough. In fact, it was surprisingly satisfying to end up with a clean CPU top. Using a couple of artist brushes to knock off most of the dust from the components went well, and cleaning the case with a slightly damp paper towel went as expected also. So far, I was feeling fairly confident with this project, yet when it came to applying the thermal paste to the CPU, that was another story. Applying it was rather nerve-wracking, especially while filming the process. The thermal paste texture is really stringy, and I can see why people complain that it can get all over the place if you are not being careful. If you're wondering why I chose to spread the thermal paste across the top of the CPU opposed to any other methods, I did it simply because it seemed the most interesting at the time, and for no other reason. I suspect in the end that I got a fairly even application, judging all things considered. the heatsink went on fairly easily. With that being said, considering that this clip-on method was a little loosey-goosey, if you've never tried clipping a heatsink and a CPU back together again, I suggest that you do a practice run first, without thermal paste being applied. Replacing the BIOS battery would have been a bit more problematic if I hadn't had a plastic pick to help me get it out of its tightly sprung battery holder. Once I switched out the 1 GB memory card for a 2 GB card, I found installing them a bit more difficult than uninstalling them. Either it was because of the tight fit, or once again because of my arthritic fingers. Happily, they eventually securely clipped into place. It was nice to start putting stuff back into the case. Considering that I took reference pictures of all the connections, I was fairly confident that everything would end up getting plugged back together correctly. With that being said, I confess that I did take my time doing it. The last piece of hardware I installed was the 16 GB memory stick, which was plugged into my new USB adapter to be used as a secondary internal drive. Let me assure you that this is more experimental than it is practical. With the case buttoned up, it was finally time to see if I had destroyed my computer or not. With some relief, I was happy to see it come to life with a new copy of Linux Mint 21.2 installed. I was also thankful to see that the internal USB stick was recognized. Other than that, I have to confess that Linux Mint plays YouTube videos well enough on this aging hardware. Well, that's it for now. This presentation is released as public domain. I hope to see you again soon. Goodbye for now.